regime know in advance of the Hamas attack on October 7th, 2023?
I don't believe so. I think that the lower levels of Israeli intelligence were well aware of it and tried to warn the Netanyahu administration, but ran into the usual problem that causes intelligence failures, namely not a lack of information or analysis, but disbelief as facts encounter an entrenched political position and assumptions. The one thing you can say about this is that was the beginning of quite a series of collapses of credibility on the part of the Netanyahu government, a series of failures. After all, he had been paying off Hamas as part of a strategy of dividing the Palestinians, doing that in collaboration with the state of Qatar. And it all came home to roost 2 years ago today.
Was he still paying Hamas at the time of the attack, or had the Israelis stopped paying Hamas once they realized it wasn't going to do their bidding?
I really don't know, but I don't see there's been any evidence of an end to that plan. The Israelis were very complacent. They had created the world's largest open-air concentration camp, and they had locked the Palestinians in there. Periodically, to use their grotesque language, they would go in and, quote, mow the grass, unquote, meaning murder a lot of people to intimidate the others, demonstrating that they are a terrorist state, a state that rules by terror. And they thought it was working. And on October 7th, 2 years ago, the Palestinians erupted from the concentration camp in what was initially a quite brilliantly planned military campaign. They were joined, of course, by many others who were not in on the operation, civilians, some of whom were just looking for a chance to see outside the walls of the camp they'd been imprisoned in, others looking for looting, others looking to provide retribution to the Israelis who had been doing terrible things to them for the previous almost 2 decades. So that was an event that represented the total collapse of the Israeli policy on Gaza and Palestine. And it put the Palestinian self-determination issue back on the global agenda, which was Hamas's objective. So I don't know, they may have militarily been harbored, they may have been subjected to genocide, but their diplomatic or political agenda has succeeded.
Was there a stand-down order, as many in the West believe? That is, did the Netanyahu government tell the IDF not to shoot back?
No, I don't think that was the case. The fact is that part of the IDF had been redeployed to the West Bank. There were efforts being made even then to do what is happening now, which is to intensify the pressure on Palestinian inhabitants of the West Bank in order to engage in ethnic cleansing, establish more settlements, and so forth. So that the force that was on the border was relatively minor. Here's an important point. Hamas attacked the military installations. A lot of the damage to civilians occurred at the hands of other undisciplined groups, or, in fact, probably about half of the civilian deaths, at least, were caused by the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, under the so-called Hannibal Directive, by which Israel considers that it should kill rather than permit Israeli citizens to be taken hostage.
Is there any question in your mind but that Israeli forces murdered their own civilians pursuant to this crazy directive, rather than allow them to be taken as hostages.
No, there's no doubt whatsoever. There's ample visual evidence, people who looked at the situation. Of course, it's all complicated by the Israeli Hasbara exculpation exercise, which invented all sorts of atrocities which there's no evidence occurred. Mass rapes, the murder of babies. We've heard it all in the form of repeated lies from Prime Minister Netanyahu and others who have been revealed to be fraudulent in their claims. From the point of view of Prime Minister Netanyahu, this was initially a grave blow to his political prestige. He very adroitly tried to turn it into a rallying cry for his continued survival in office. And to do that, he participated in the invention of all kinds of imaginary horrors. Not to say that for those Israelis living or engaged in a musical festival on the border of the concentration camp, this wasn't seriously traumatic. It was. And ironically, Hamas took, about 250 hostages over the border. Some of them were killed en route over the border by the Israelis. Some of them made it over the border and into the tunnels. And of course, the only significant recovery of those hostages has occurred through negotiations between Hamas and Israel, brokered by the United States and others, Qatar. And Qatar was rewarded for that with an attack on Doha, its capital, an abuse of its sovereignty, and the murder of, among others, of one of its security officials.
Was this war an excuse for Netanyahu, A, to stay in office, enjoying some sort of limited immunity from the 3 prosecutions against him, and B, an excuse to please his right-wing collaborators by expanding the borders of Israel?
Both. Netanyahu's political future has been closely entwined with the Israeli response to October 7th, which I wouldn't call a war. It's an annihilation, an effort at exterminating large numbers of Palestinians. We know that the official figures that both Hamas and Israel tout are gross understatements of the actual number of deaths and wounded. They represent only those individuals who've been positively identified.